Good afternoon again, and thanks for joining us for our lunchtime webinar. This is day 3 of the first Marine Economy Week that Harper McLeod has been running, and we're very happy to have you with us today. My name's Peter McLuckie, and I'm a Senior Associate with Harper McLeod, working with the Marine Economy team, particularly covering the Highlands, Islands and Murray. So this week we've had two events already. We've had some fantastic guest speakers. We've heard from Morven Cameron of Highlands and Islands Enterprise about the importance of the marine economy to Scotland and the wide reach in terms of the industries that are covered. And we heard some great plans for what they're calling the blue economy. And yesterday we heard about the role of emerging technologies, and we were delighted to hear from Paul Chapman, a patent attorney from Marks & Clark, as well as Paula Skinner from our entrepreneurial team and Jamie Watt from our IP and trade team. So we're delighted today to be joined by Trond Hatland from Norwegian law firm Thommessen. Thank you very much, Trond, for joining us. We're going to be discussing trading after Brexit, and we'll also be hearing a view from Norway. Our marine economies are so well intertwined that there's a lot of interplay between our countries, and it'll be interesting to hear Trond's perspective later. So a bit of housekeeping first. Cameras and microphones are off, but please do give us your views and give us your questions in the chat box function. Now, we'll try our best to get through those questions, but if we don't manage to, then please wait to hear from us. We'll be taking a note of all the questions, and we'll get in touch with you after the event so that we can answer your question. Today we've got 3 parts. We're going to discuss first the EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement and how it impacts the marine economy. And then we'll hand over to Trond to hear his view from Norway. And at that point, we'll also have questions for Trond after he's spoken. And depending how we're doing for time, after that, we'll look at some additional consequences for the marine economy of the UK leaving the EU. This is a huge topic, so we're only going to be scratching the surface today. But hopefully we'll give you some highlights about how the marine economy is being impacted or potentially could be impacted by the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. Now, just for the sake of an acronym, I'll be referring to that as the TCA today, just for speed. But just so you understand, that's what I'm referring to. So we've got some slides to show you today, but they're mainly just an agenda rather than anything else to show you the topics that we're going to be looking at. So first, on the TCA itself, there are 7 parts to the agreement, and it covers a multitude of different areas, as I'm sure you know. New bodies, new institutions are set up to look after the relationship between the EU and the UK. There's a very large section on trade, transport and fisheries, which is the one we'll be looking at particularly today. There's a section on law enforcement, health and cyber security, financial management, dispute resolution, and some final provisions, including territorial scope and the effective dates. Now, in terms of the marine economy, there is a section in the TCA that deals with energy, gas and renewable energy, but it's very general. It's not as specific as when we look at, for example, fisheries. So to the extent that the marine economy, is impacted by renewable energy, the TCA really doesn't give us a huge amount to work with, although it is more to do with cooperation between the EU and the UK, of which I'm sure there'll be much in the coming years in terms of the net zero targets. When it comes to looking at fisheries and trade, certainly the negotiations around fisheries have been well publicised, and certainly when the TCA was concluded in late December, there was some noise around what had been finally agreed in terms of fisheries. So just to summarise where we are, essentially for the next 5 years, we have what is very similar to the status quo in terms of access to waters. There will be annual negotiations on total allowable catch, but essentially for that transitional period up to the 30th of June 2026, we are where we were. The TCA does set out some general principles of what will happen, though, after that transitional period, and there will be an annual round of negotiations based on total allowable catch. And those negotiations will be conducted by a new committee, a specialised committee on fisheries, who will have a very busy annual timetable. And the timetable is set out in a lot of detail in the TCA. The general principles of dealing are worth looking at. So when the annual discussions on total allowable catch are conducted, the TCA sets out in great detail the principles that the parties need to look to. And I'll go through some of these because they set the agenda for what the negotiations will be. If I could maybe just ask Kira to go back a couple of slides. Yeah, that's fine. So the principles that the committees will be following are adopting a precautionary approach to fisheries management. So the theme throughout the TCA is about promoting sustainability on the basis of environmental, social and economic concerns, and optimising the shared stocks of fish in the shared waters. It's very much a scientific approach. So the International Council for the Exploration of the Sea will provide advice, and there's advice available from that body, which the parties to the TCA will use in their negotiations on the total allowable catch. And building on the sustainability side, the protecting juvenile fish and spawning areas are a critical principle which the parties need to follow. They will be looking at marine biological diversity, and they need to make sure that the whole of the marine living resources are conserved and managed properly. So those are the types of principles that the EU and the UK will be working with on an annual basis to reach agreement on the total allowable catch. Now, the principles behind this is all about access to waters, but right at the beginning of the fisheries section in the TCA, it's clear that the UK's guiding principle is that it is an independent coastal state, and that, if you like, is the overarching principle that the parties must have regard to. And it's particularly interesting having Trond with us today because for the first time, a trilateral agreement was reached between the EU, Norway and the UK as independent coastal states on the 16th of March. And that's been well publicised in terms of its impact on UK fisheries, certainly. Just by way of clarification, in terms of the geographical reach of the fisheries sections within the TCA, that includes Jersey, Guernsey and the Isle of Man, as well as the mainland UK waters. Going away then from the principles of the annual negotiations, it's worth bearing in mind that there's a degree of tension in the fishing negotiations, and the principles that are set out make it clear that this agreement is capable of termination on 9 months' notice, which I think everyone will agree seems quite a short period of time. And essentially, it is essentially an annual process, and that annual process could well be terminated at any point. And I think that's particularly relevant at the moment, given what we're seeing with the debates over vaccinations. We can see how quickly these kind of discussions can get into trouble. And why that's so important for us is that the impact of a failure to agree a position on fishing on an annual basis could well impact the rest of the TCA, because it's not just fisheries and preferential trade in fisheries that could be affected. It could be the entire agreement. So I think the importance of fisheries can't be overstated, because it could well impact the rest of the agreement that has been reached between the UK and the EU if there's a failure to agree. So that's an introduction to fisheries in general under the TCA. And what I'd like to do next is go much further, drilling into the TCA and look at rules of origin. And this is particularly in connection with seafood in the context of the marine economy. So rules of origin, there's nothing new in this, and they exist in free trade agreements to encourage cross-border trade at preferential tariffs. So the default position, if you don't have a free trade agreement, as we all know, is WTO terms. So rules of origin are protectionist by design, and this particularly applies to fisheries and seafood, where they're such a major part of the economies of both the EU and the UK that in the TCA, which is a free trade agreement that's been agreed between the UK and the EU, they are very keen, both parties are very keen to protect their own products. And because fisheries and seafood are so important to both parties, it plays a major role in rules of origin. So at a basic level, goods that are originating in one party have preferential tariffs in the other. And so then it comes down to the question of what is originating. And that's what rules of origin deals with. So let's look first at claiming preferential tariffs. So the importer of products into a country has the obligation to comply with the rules of origin in order to claim preferential tariffs. And there are two main routes to compliance with those rules. The first is a statement on origin, and that is a statement that's supplied by the supplier, and that may be on an invoice or another commercial document, for example, a bill of lading or a delivery note, which describes the product in sufficient detail to identify its origin. So the supplier provides that to its customer, and the supplier must then hold background documentation to make sure it's able to back up the origin. And if that position changes in any way, then it must change its statements and advise its customers accordingly. So statements on origin can apply to multiple shipments, so it doesn't need to be per shipment. And it's possible that the exporter will need a declaration from its supplier, which also gives a statement on origin and allows it to have the evidence to substantiate where the product has originated from. So there's standard wording in the TCA about what a statement on origin looks like. And essentially what it does, it sets out the name of the exporter. It's got an exporter reference number. It obviously needs to be signed. And then there's a bold statement on origin, where the products have originated from. The place and date of signature has to be included in that statement, as does the name of the exporter. So that's the first way that origin can be proved. The second way is through importer's knowledge. And this essentially means what it says. If the importer is in a position to know where the products have originated from, then it can use that as justification for proving origin. Now, the importer still has to maintain documentation. It still has to be able to prove that if challenged. And that's really the important point for all businesses dealing with imports and exports of products. They are liable at any time to be put to the task of proving where products come from, and customs authorities can carry out audits, and they will need different forms of backup depending whether you're using a supplier statement on origin or importer knowledge. And they may even need to cooperate with the exporting party's customs authorities in that verification process. So that's all about proving origin, how you go about showing your authorities where products have originated from. There are then principles that we should look at when we're talking about proving origin. And I'll talk about 4 different principles. The first is wholly obtained. And that really is self-evident. A product is wholly obtained in a country if it's, for example, grown in that country, or if it's an animal that's reared in that country. And particularly from the point of view of the marine side of things, fish caught in territorial waters are wholly obtained from that territory, or seafood reared in that territory, even if it's from third-party country seed. And of particular importance, fish caught by a UK or EU vessel outside territorial waters will still be able to claim origin as wholly obtained, subject to ownership requirements of the vessel. So wholly obtained, a very important principle behind rules of origin. The next principle is cumulation, and this is, again, one that's been well publicised. And essentially what cumulation means is that a product originating in one party to the TCA, i.e. the EU or the UK, can claim that the product originating in the other party is essentially treated as originating from themselves. So this is called bilateral cumulation, and we'll come on to that in a bit more detail later on. Now, within some product rules of origin, there are tolerances, which mean that if you bring in materials from a third country, provided those materials do not form a large percentage of the finished product, then you can claim that it still originates in your territory, even though you've used input materials from a third country. And these tolerances are usually expressed as a percentage of the total weight, or a percentage of the ex-works price of the finished goods. And lastly, in terms of general principles, is the accounting principle. So what this allows is a mix of originating and non-originating products, provided you have segregation by means of an accounting system. So the classic one of this is sugar or spirit. So, for example, if you're making a chocolate bar and you have sugar, obviously in that chocolate bar, your supply of sugar may come from around the world. But provided you have a system that shows where the sugar has come from, then you're able to then account for the amount of sugar that you put in that might not be originating. And provided you've got that accounting process, you're able to show that you've not exceeded a tolerance within your finished product for non-originating materials. So those are the general principles. Having said that, in terms of general principles, the businesses who are manufacturing products will have to be aware of the specific rules of origin that relate to their products. And so even if you know the principles, you really have to drill down into the product-specific rules of origin. Now, these product-specific rules rely on product classifications that come from the harmonized commodity description and coding system of the World Customs Organization. And these are used throughout the world in free trade agreements and have been incorporated into the TCA so that a manufacturer, for example, can look up its product code within the TCA and then check the rules around origination in the TCA. And these are held in an annex called Annex Orig 2, and we're going to give you a couple of examples of that now. So if I could have the next slide, Kira, we'll show you one of those examples. So just to explain first about the harmonized code. So there are various chapters relating to different products. Now, obviously today we're focusing on seafood and fish. So you'll see here on the slide, chapter 3 This is a very general chapter that relates to fish and crustaceans, mollusks, other aquatic invertebrates. And there's a huge list of products within that chapter. And you'll see that this is an excerpt from the TCA, and the product-specific rule that relates to fish and crustaceans, etc., are that production in which all of the materials of Chapter 3 used are wholly obtained. So we talked about wholly obtained earlier. So essentially, you must have wholly obtained products which fall into this category of fish, crustaceans, etc. You can't then import these types of products from a third country, i.e. not a participating country, and then claim preferential tariffs. So looking just down at another example, so if we look at the chapters, Chapter 3 relates to fish, and there are a number of subheadings within that. So heading 0301, for example, is live fish. 030191 is trout, and I've pulled that out specifically for reasons you'll see later. Heading 0303 is frozen fish. And another example, heading 0313 is Atlantic salmon. So if you deal in frozen Atlantic salmon, then your product category is 030313. And that means that you can then check the product-specific rule of origin, which we can see there, is that production in which all of the materials of Chapter 3 used are wholly obtained. So what that means is if you deal in frozen Atlantic salmon, in order to claim preferential tariffs in the EU, that Atlantic salmon has to be originating either in the EU waters or in the UK. So it is quite limiting, and it's interesting that we have Trond with us today because we were discussing earlier that this does have an impact on trade with Norway, because obviously Norway is not a participating country in the EU. So therefore, when you're looking at the origin of products from Norway, this does give you a bit of a challenge in terms of claiming preferential tariffs. So moving on to another example, and we'll go on to the next slide here, another chapter from the harmonized code. So this deals with preparations of meat, fish, crustaceans, etc. So rather than being, if you like, the raw product, these are processed products. And this gives you a bit more leeway in certain occasions, but in the context of fish and seafood, it's still very limiting. So to give you another example, if we look at these chapters, Chapter 16, heading 1604 is prepared or preserved fish. 1604.12 is herring. So again, a product that's very close to our hearts here in the north. Prepared herring. If you were looking at your product-specific rule of origin, you would have to look to this Chapter 16 rule that says production in which all of the materials used are wholly obtained. So again, you're having to use raw product from either the EU or the UK in your preparation of your preserved herrings. So again, quite limiting in terms of our neighbouring countries such as Norway. Now, there is an exception within this chapter heading, and I've called it the tuna exception. And this is unusual in the sense that it is a quota-based restriction. So in terms of discussions on the TCA, one of the main points of difference were that it was tariff-free and quota-free trade. Well, that's not entirely true. In the case of canned tuna, for example, there are quotas on how much of that can be traded between the EU and the UK. And just as another example under this chapter, Chapter 16, if we look at 1604.19, this is other prepared fish. So there's a whole list of specific species of fish within that chapter, and the other heading will cover obviously everything else. And included in that is trout. So this is an interesting example because unlike herring, you can import trout from a third country, put it through a process of preparation or preservation, and then treat it as an originating product and export it to the EU. So I think the lesson from this is you do have to drill down into very great detail to find out exactly what your product's rules are. And this, as I said at the beginning, this is all about protecting the products of the parties to the TCA. So I'm sure everyone is totally confused now after that. So please do give us any questions you have on those particular rules or how they're applied. So rules of origin, just to recap, they're all about preferential tariffs and also about quota-free trade, with the exception of canned tuna, of course. Having said that, there are technical barriers to trade, and those of you in the industry will be more than aware of this. What the TCA states is that the parties must aim to keep technical barriers to trade to a minimum. But as we've seen recently, there are technical barriers that are causing some trouble, and particularly we can see this within the health checks that are required for animal-based products. And we've read recently the Scottish salmon producers saying how much they've had to incur in terms of costs for the additional checks that are being required for export. And these are sanitary and phytosanitary checks, export health certificates, and the customs documentation that they're now being required to produce. So even although in principle we have the tariff-free trade, there are these technical issues that could still cause some issues in terms of free trade between the parties to the TCA. Now, just a plug at the moment for more guidance. In fairness to the government, there is a huge amount of guidance out there. And I would encourage anyone who's in the industry to go onto the government website to look for guidance. And also, if you need more specific legal help, obviously, we can help you with that. So that was a very fast canter through rules of origin and also the way of claiming preferential tariffs. So at this point, we'll not take questions just now. I'd like to hand over to Trond to give you a rest from me and also hear what Trond has to say in terms of the view from Norway.
So thanks a lot for the introduction, Peter, and thanks for the invitation to take part at the Hartland Marine Economy Week. And it's a great pleasure to take part, even though I can't see all the participants. Maybe next year we'll be there live. So my name is Trond Hatland. I'm working with Thommessen, a large Norwegian law firm, and I'm based in Bergen. And we used to say that Bergen is far closer to Shetland than to Oslo, just to bring the ties. I'll try and share the screen now, and we'll see if we get the presentation online. So just give me a signal, Peter, if it doesn't turn up on screen. Good. So I'm asked to provide some views from Norway on the fishery and aquaculture sector in Norway, and I've been working with that sector for approximately 20 years. And of course, UK is a really important friend and business partner when it comes to this sector. I'll give a brief overview of the sector in Norway, and I'll give some perspectives on growth, how we see this sector developing, and also developing towards the UK and the UK market, and some trends within aquaculture in Norway, and how that can influence the trade also with the UK. So first of all, to the brief overview, Norway is Europe's largest fishing nation And the total catch, it will vary, of course, but it's usually somewhere between 2.5 and 3 million tons per year. And the total export value, it amounts to approximately 2.6 billion pounds. There are a number of important markets when it comes to fisheries and catch for Norway. And of course, UK is an important market when it comes to cod, for instance. We also have some leading marketplaces because the trade in fish in the first hand from the vessels to onshore facilities, that's totally regulated in Norway. It's placed with sales organizations owned by Norwegian fishermen. It's quite an extraordinary construction, this, but it works fairly well. And that means that you have a few sales organizations which will take care of all the Norwegian catch and from all of the economic sphere of Norway, and also is open to trading catch from other countries as well. So a UK vessel can offer the fish and land it in Norway through these sales organizations, and UK onshore industry can purchase a catch from these sales organizations. So it goes both ways. We also have a few global fishing companies, and one of those is really huge, both in their own catch and in the processing of fish. And they actually process 1+% of the global catch. And that goes, of course, to fish meal and fish oil, which is a global market. Now, when we come to aquaculture, the Norwegian production of farmed salmon, it's tightly regulated, of course, in Norway, as it is many places around the world. So we have fairly good control of the total production and also of the total export. And the production of farmed salmon and trout amounts to approximately 1.3 million tons per year. The export is close to that. We keep 100,000 tons for ourselves and export the rest. So the total export value, it amounts to approximately 6.5 billion pounds per year. We do have some large players within the aquaculture industry. Mowi ASA, it's the world's largest fish farmer, and it's the fourth largest in the world within the seafood industry. You have some in Asia. They have both catch and fish farming and are fairly big, but we have a number 4 company here. And also the number 10, Austevoll Seafood, and the number 20, they are fish farmers. And then you have companies originating in Netherlands, the US, and Denmark, but with the largest parts of those corporations in Norway, and they are within the fish feed industry. So they are the largest fish feed producers in the world. When we turn to perspectives on growth, I mean, it's a large industry now, but what will the future be? When we look at the fisheries, we see that land-based food production is limited, of course, as we know. And future increase in human consumption has to come from the sea and in a sustainable manner. So that's the challenge. Then again, when you look at the traditional fisheries, it's limited, of course, the total allowable catch, and the sustainability is a problem. We are on the brink of extinction from year to another for certain species, and we are looking carefully into how much you can sustainably catch in the future. And there we've always had a good cooperation, of course, with the EU and now with the UK when it comes to the annual negotiations on the quotas and so forth. So we don't foresee any more tension onwards when it comes to that. We do have the ICES system, and it works fairly well for the northern hemisphere at least. But what we see is that fish feed for the aquaculture industry is also limited when you look at the origin or the sources of that. Because there is a limited production of fish oil and fish meal being the basis for fish feed. And already a large proportion of that has been replaced by plant-based raw ingredients. So we have limited resources, and we're pushing the fish feed production over to plant-based raw ingredients. And that gives, of course, challenges because land-based production is limited too. So what do we do? There is a race for harvesting krill and other species, and even down to the planktonic stages. And it's been calculated that if you're able to catch, let's say, 1% of the world production of the planktonic stages or krill, that could feed approximately 30 billion people. So the potential is huge, and Norwegian industries are now challenging each other for patents, rights, technology, and even building vessels, increasingly larger vessels going into the Antarctic to catch the krill. So that's an ongoing race as we speak. Within the aquaculture sector, the players themselves, they aim at doubling the export over the next 9 to 10 years. And how do we go about that? How is that possible when you are pushing the limits already? Well, first of all, we have introduced in Norway what we call a traffic light system. And it says that within the 13 management or production areas in Norway, you have predefined environmental indicators saying if you can grow, if you are status quo, or if you have to reduce your production. And now it's been the traffic lights, they've been turned on in 2020 for the first time. It's limited to the indicator of sea lice. So based upon the levels of sea lice within the facilities, it will be decided whether or not an area can grow or will have to wait. So it's been calculated that based on this traffic light system alone, the sector will continue to grow with 3% per year, every year onwards. Now it's not without conflicts, because if you get a red light and you have an order to reduce your production, that, of course, will cause huge losses for the fish farmers involved. So we have both ongoing litigation in Norway to that effect, where Thommessen assists the fish farmers of Western Norway, and you have an international evaluation committee. Now, if if we succeed in having control of the industry and we are able to grow, it can be the growth rate can be more than 3% per year. But we have to do more, and it's been accepted that we have to move fish farming also onshore to huge land-based fish farming facilities. So there is a lot of technology developments now, R&D going on for that, and that will be for two parts. First of all, to make larger smolt, maybe up to a kilo even, to reduce the fish farming time at sea or in the fjords. And the third part of it will be to have large offshore deep sea installations, because they will not be in conflict with any coastal or local interests or the wild salmon and wild trout. So that's the ambition of the industry in Norway, to double the exports from fish farming by 2030. And our government, they have an ambition, up to 2050, where they assume that the production from aquaculture will be 4 times doubled. So if that turns out to be a good estimate, we'll have a production and export close to 5 million tons per year in 2050. So we are really looking at the growth perspective. Now turning to some trends within aquaculture, we see that the industrial focus is quite strong. We have a number of years now with structural changes where the players are getting bigger. So almost every month you have mergers and takeovers and joint ventures and whatnot to have larger players within that industry. We also see that fish farmers take control of the whole value chain, from hatcheries and smolt production to fish farming and even to export, organizing export in larger quantities. And then we have the infrastructure changes going on, where the players are growing larger too. And a really active player has been Antin Infrastructure Partners. I believe they have some business in the UK too, but they have really put together the world's largest wellboat company to take control of the transportation of live salmon and trout, and also to start processing the fish at sea on its way to onshore facilities. We've also seen R&D in the direction of finding new ways to the market, because if you have to land all Norwegian farmed fish on shore in Norway, the next step will be to have a number of trailers on the narrow Norwegian roads, where we are famous for the narrow roads, and it's not sustainable and it's not safe to have those huge quantities by road transportation. So we're trying to find new ways to transport the fish to the market, and that can be both the UK market and the EU market. Now, the problem with that is that Norwegian onshore facilities, they try to find obstacles for that, because if you transport the fish directly to the markets without any processing in Norway, you will have a reduction in the workforce. So the Norwegian unions are quite against this. On the next slide, we have the last piece of invention. It's a vessel now going to Denmark directly It's a one-off project. We had to go to court to get the governmental grant to put this vessel in operation, and we succeeded. So it now goes to Denmark, and it can take 1,000 tons of salmon in one batch. So it's being taken directly from the fish farms, being instantly frozen or nearly frozen to 0.5 degrees, and then shipped to Denmark within a few hours. So it's ultra fresh and top quality, going directly to the market. Now other players are looking at possible loopholes too. Can we find similar ways to bring the fish to the market? Another trend is that the capital markets in Norway are really hot. Foreign investors come to Norway to raise and place capital. The Oslo Stock Exchange has been taken over by Euronext, and we have a growth version of that, Euronext Growth, where small and medium-sized businesses can raise capital, and you have a really rapid listing process. And from filing an application until you are open for trading, it can be as little as 48 hours. We have a number of successful seafood company listings taking place over the last months, and both traditional fish farming and also the R&D companies looking at new ways to go with fish farming and products from fish farming. And I made a small statistic here of the last month listings with Euronext in Europe. And we found that of 20 listings over the last month, in Amsterdam, Brussels, Dublin, Paris, Lisbon, and Oslo, 13 of those were in Oslo. So that's a tip. If you have a project and need launching, you need capital being raised, or you want to invest in the seafood sector, Oslo is an excellent choice. Now I'm getting close to my time limit, Peter, but I had the opportunity, I understood, to have a few remarks on Brexit and the relationship to the UK after Brexit. So for now, we have a preliminary agreement, as you know. It's sort of a standstill agreement to say that we continue business until we have a final and long-lasting agreement when it comes to customs and veterinary issues. And the last report is that the deadlines for full customs control and full veterinary control have been postponed to later on this year, and in fact to the 1st of January 2022. We have a couple of concerns for the future. One is the rules of origin, as Peter explained. I looked at the statistics, and the estimate is that approximately 30% of the export from Norway to the UK of fish and seafood, they are in transit. They go through, let's say, Denmark as the typical example. And it's been mixed with, previously, been mixed with Danish produce. So you have large batches compatible with the market's expectations. Now, when you can't do that, when you have to split, you have to separate the Norwegian catch or fish farm fish from the Danish. It makes it a bit more complicated. And that goes the other way around. In order to compensate, we're not able to take, let's say, Danish products to Norway and then export them together with the Norwegian products to the UK. We have to split. It's the rules of origins, and they're quite strict. Another obstacle is health certificates. because when we could ship everything together with, let's say, Danish fish, the Danish veterinary authorities could issue the health certificates beforehand. Now we have to have purely Norwegian health certificates, and they have to be as original documents following each shipment. So you need the physical paper in hand. And when you have the frozen products, that's no problem. It's a lasting product, and the quality won't be reduced. But when you have fresh fish being landed in Norway, you have to find an office who can submit the health certificate. You have to put that on the truck or the vessel, and you will have to find batches within hours that the market will be able to buy. A small one of cod or a larger one of salmon. You have to, within a few hours, you have to lay out the whole chain until the end buyer in the UK, for instance. And that's a huge challenge. We have suggested to the UK authorities to have digital health certificates, but so far the UK have not responded, according to our foreign ministry. So those were the few insights. A little bit of Thommessen commercial at the end. We are a large player in Norway, and we have offices in Oslo, Bergen, London, and Stavanger. And if there are any questions, please feel free to contact me or my colleague in London. So thank you, Peter. I think I've used 22 minutes.
Just to be precise. well done for containing that. That was really very interesting. And I think particularly what's interesting to me is hearing you speak and having heard Morven from HIE on Monday. It's interesting just how similar some of the challenges in the aquaculture sector, particularly, are shared between Norway and Scotland, and particularly on sustainability. Now, we do have one question that's come in, which a very specific question on extracting protein from low down in the marine food chain. So you were talking about the trend to looking at planktonic food sources, and I suppose the question is, are there challenges coming to that in terms of its sustainability, and I guess you're affecting the whole food chain if you're then harvesting at that level in planktonic level.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think the scientists are researching on that matter as we speak. Now, the example of taking 1% of that production and using that as food or transforming it into food for 30 billion people, it shows the scale. So I think we are now looking at harvesting really smaller proportions of that, let's say 0.1%, something like that, and see how it works. The research so far indicates that if you are below 1% of harvest in the planktonic stages or the krill, that would not seriously affect the ecosystem. And you can, of course, adjust it to the annual produce so that you won't go over a total allowable catch. And the large catch at the moment, the large harvesting projects at the moment is the Antarctic krill, which is quite successful, and I think they've not so far discovered any problems with that.
Yeah, that's really interesting answer. Thanks, Nick Lambert, for that question. The other thing that struck me when you were speaking, Trond, is the in terms of technology, and particularly marine technology, which is what we were discussing yesterday in our webinar. So again, very interesting to see how we're sharing these experiences across the North Sea. Now, I'll just invite any other questions from the attendees just now. We're running short of time. I did have a couple of other topics to cover, but there's no need to cover them if we do have other questions coming in. There doesn't appear to be anything at the moment, or if anyone has any questions arising out of the initial charge through the TCA rules of origin, etc. If there are any questions on that, please, of course, feel free to post that in the chat box as well. Just to wrap up, I think it's probably worth us just highlighting a few more effects of the TCA potentially on the marine economy, and I'm only going to highlight three of those. The first is the subsidy regime and the state aid rules, which everyone will be aware was a major discussion point in the negotiations between the EU and the UK. So in some respects, the UK was successful in its approach to this, in that it was able to suggest a new subsidy regime as opposed to agreeing to abide by the EU subsidies regime. But how this may impact the marine economy, obviously, is that there will be a new system of state aid rules that anyone seeking funding, for example, will need to be aware of. So EU state aid rules no longer applicable. And similarly, in terms of funding available from the EU, so the structural funds, these will no longer be open to UK businesses. Now, clearly the UK government has stated its intention to create a substitute for that, shared prosperity funds, and these will be available for UK businesses. And interestingly, this week, I noticed that the marine and fisheries grants were opened for applications, £14 million being made available. And that's replacing the European Maritime and Fisheries Fund. So there will be other examples of this rising as EU funding ceases to be available for UK businesses. And again, I think it's a case of watching the space to see those grants specific to the marine economy as they become available. So I'm just checking for any more questions. From Robbie Galbraith, thanks for this question. Does the push for land-based salmon farming in Norway going to lead to yet more salmon farming by Norwegian companies in Scottish waters? Interesting question.
So, if I may comment on that, we see that some of the really large players, the top 20 in the world, a few of those in Norway, they have since long been established also in Scotland and Chile and other places, and that's of course to diversify. To reduce the risk of major decreases following disease and parasites and so forth. And I think that the government being the most favorable and welcoming to those companies will of course succeed. So when we see that Canada is trying to close down areas because of the native population, the companies are immediately trying to recover their production elsewhere, and that could be Scotland, it could be Norway, it could be somewhere else. And we also see, and that's from the traffic light system case, which the ongoing litigation I referred to. We see that Scotland has, in our point of view, a better control of the environmental assessment, the environmental impacts of fish farming. And when you are in better control, or if you are in better control, you can of course allow for more production because you're monitoring it quite closely. So yes, it can definitely be more interesting also to grow in Scotland for Norwegian companies.
Well, thanks very much, Trond, for that, and thanks, Robbie, for that question. I'm conscious we're out of time now, so I think I'd probably just like to wrap up there. Just remind everybody that we still have 2 days to go in the Marine Economy Week. We've got vessels, finance and funding tomorrow, international aspect being provided by Mike Bestian from Damon Shipyards, and then finally marine and offshore renewables on Friday. So it would be great if you could join us then. And thanks again to Trond for joining us today. It's a pleasure having you, Trond, and thanks so much for your insight and expertise in the aquaculture area. We really appreciate you joining us today. So I'll wrap up there, and thanks again. We'll hopefully see you for the remaining days in the Marine Economy Week. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, Peter, and take care, everyone.
Thanks, Trond.
Bye.